Greetings, Recipe Key here with our next seminar Saturdays. This week, we'll be talking about a paper on how to spy on the SEC and what we find out when we do that. The paper is called Watching the Watchdogs, the Information Content of SEC Interactions by William Gerken, Stephen Irlbeck, Marcus Painter, and Guangli Zhang. My apologies if I mangled anyone's name. And this was presented at AFA 2026, as well as quite a few other conferences. And a few introductory notes. I was at the presentation because one of the authors, Irlbeck, is a very good friend of mine, and we are co-authors on a different paper. So when I say really great things about this paper, I could be a little biased. So, Security Exchange Commission, that is one of many financial regulators. One of their focuses is publicly traded companies. And they do various enforcement actions when the publicly traded companies or the executives at those companies break the rules. We will see the results of investigations that are successful, but only at the end. And law enforcement, which the SEC is effectively kind of law enforcement, they don't like to show their processes before they've actually opened a formal investigation because they want to maintain a competitive advantage over people that are breaking the law. So there's been quite a bit of research on what happens once you have an SEC investigation become public, so everyone knows about it, but obviously you had some preliminary behind the scenes actions going on before you do the public investigation. And we can't see that. But this paper, they have a new type of data, one that's being widely used in all sorts of new papers to find out what's going on behind the scenes. And funnily enough, after they released their working paper last year, the federal government very quickly said, no, you're not allowed to get access to this data and use it on government employees anymore. So people in the government were paying attention to this paper. So what data are they using? Well, it's cell phone data. Any app that you allow to track your location is collecting that data, and that data is available for purchase. So they purchased cell phone location data for basically 1 year, 2019 through 2020. They stopped February 2020 because when the pandemic happens, there's not a lot of physical movement anymore. In order to get map that location to actual building sites, they get look at the locations of all the SEC offices from the SEC website and the firm headquarter location from historical 10K filings. Any device that frequently pings inside the building that is the SEC office, that's an SEC phone. And the reason they call it an SEC phone is because there's a high chance that this is a phone that is being used by an SEC employee. Could be a personal phone, could be a work phone that an employee is using. Likewise, if we have a device that frequently pings inside the corporate HQ, well, it's a company phone, probably used by a company employee, although, of course, we can't guarantee it. They treat a frequent ping as being at least 20 hours during regular work week, during regular working hours, 9 to 5. Okay, so here's a map that they have in the paper of what the cell phone pings look like. The yellow building in the bottom right here, that's a headquarter for a company. There's some other buildings. There's a movie theater across the street, diagonal across the street from that headquarter building. If there's a red ping, that means the cell phone pinged inside the building. You can kind of even see people that are going to the wings of the building, which is probably where all the movie screens are. And there's lots of pings inside the building itself. But there's enough precision that they can actually detect very very accurately where the person is when the cell phone pings, and they had all these pings in the parking lot of these various buildings, on the streets, people probably driving to and from. There's a major road up here, it looks like, which has lots of pings. So they have a very, very precise location data. So they know this person's inside the building. Some other things they use besides the location data, they did a FOIA request from SEC and got all the closed SEC investigations. These are investigations that are completed. Law enforcement doesn't like giving out information when they have ongoing investigations, so they don't have anything from that, nor any of the informal inquiries that maybe never become a formal investigation. They look up all the registered investment advisor locations from a form that RIAs have to file. This is because SEC also regulates RIAs, companies that manage money for people, as well as publicly traded companies, and you don't want to be capturing SEC investigations of RIAs because they do that a lot, and we're looking at publicly traded companies here, and a lot of RIAs are not publicly traded. There's SEC enforcement actions. The SEC publicly announces those. They get insider trading from the companies from words, and then the standard CompuStat and CRISP that basically every paper uses for financial and stock performance data. So the authors create a variable called firm-SEC interaction. It equals 1 if a SEC phone pings in the company HQ during work hours, or if a company phone pings at the SEC office. So what this is trying to measure is that someone had to carry the phone. Phones don't just magically float into different buildings. Someone is physically moving them. So either an SEC person came to the company HQ, or a company HQ person came to SEC, which means they're talking to each other. There's some reason why you would talk to the SEC. A much higher chance then that the reason you're talking is because there's some sort of informal investigation. So does this predict a formal investigation? Because not all of these might turn into formal investigations, but it's probably more likely than just by random chance. So it should be correlated with the SEC later opening a formal investigation, which authors know about. So they run some basic t-tests. I'm not going to show them because they're kind of basic. And if you had a prior enforcement action, you're more likely to have these cell phone pings. So the SEC is kind of keeping an eye on you because you broke the rules previously. Makes sense. If you have an ongoing investigation or ongoing enforcement actions, you're also more likely to have these interactions. Again, you're already being investigated. We know you're being investigated. Of course, there's going to be physical talking to each other if that's happening. And the real important thing here, if you have a formal investigation or enforcement action after their sample period of that 1 year, you are more likely to have had SEC interactions during that 1 year. So there is a positive correlation there. It is predicting a formal investigation or enforcement action. So yeah, these cell phone pings are associated with a formal SEC action that the public will eventually observe. But they're happening potentially before the public knows about it. And now we get to the finance part of this paper. How do the executives and insiders of the company respond to this informal investigation? If they are very brave and very, very ironic, they could do insider trading, act on this information. It would be illegal. And I say it's very brave because one of the main things the SEC does is enforcement actions on insider trading, and doing insider trading on the risk that the SEC is going to be doing an enforcement action on your company is just very deliciously ironic. And also, if you did it, you'd be a very brave person because the SEC they take insider trading pretty seriously. Well, the first thing to look at is there actually a negative return for these companies following this SEC interaction? If there isn't, there's no reason to do insider trading. So they have two uh, different samples. I'm showing the reporting company sample. This is them excluding all the RIAs that are publicly traded, because those might have a lot of false positives, because RIAs are routinely talking to the SEC. And what they find is that abnormal returns are pretty consistently going down following the SEC ping. Some of the models are 0 to 10 days, 0 to 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, a couple of different specifications for fixed effects, things like that. So if the insiders act on this knowledge, they seem to have knowledge of a event, the SEC interaction, that is going to predict a lower stock price in the future. They also show it's stronger if there's an active investigation. So if there's these pings and you already have a public investigation, you have an even bigger negative stock price return. So there is a benefit from selling, but also there's a lot of risk if you try to sell right around this interaction. So they look at the 5 days before and 5 days after. Presumably, you know the SEC is coming a little bit before they come. It's probably not a surprise inspection, or at least most of the time. And you certainly would know that you're sending someone to go talk to the SEC. And what they find is that insider trading is less likely to happen for executives. The number of trades is going down. The number of sales, which is the most obvious way to sort of profit off this negative return that you know is going to happen, it's all going down. So these are not brave insiders. They're perhaps wise insiders, because it'd be really kind of bad idea to try and take advantage of this inside information. And it's true of the reporting company sample as well as the full sample. Technically, they could also say refrain from buying more. That would also be a way to reduce your exposure to this risk of negative stock price return. It's a lot harder to show. Buying's rarer when you look at insider trading, and it's also you're also looking at an absence of evidence, so that'd be a lot harder to detect. And I know from conversations with one of the authors, my friend, like there's some selling going on, so they actually have observations to look at. Buying is extremely rare, and like they just can't find anything there, because buying just almost never happens regardless. And when you're looking at a 10-day period, there's not going to be a very many companies buying within that 10-day period, regardless of what's happening with the SEC. There are some insider characteristics that may affect things here. So, for example, a very kind of a very good and obvious one is there's some insiders who should know about this interaction, or who are more likely to know about it than others. If you're an executive, you're the CEO, you work at the HQ. So either someone that works with you, or probably if you're CEO, you sent them there, you know they went to the SEC office, or you know the SEC people were coming to your office. So you're more likely to have direct knowledge that this interaction happened. But if you're an independent director, you're some sort of outside owner, you're not likely to have direct knowledge, because you don't work at the HQ, which is one of the places the pings can happen at. So they look at officers, which are the executive people like CEO, CFO, etc., versus the non-officers. And the reduction in selling happens for both, but as you can kind of see, like very strong results in terms of the coefficients for number of selling and the probability of selling, and it's quite a bit weaker for non-officers. And if you look at reporting company sample, which is probably a more tighter sample of true potential investigations, The non-officers suddenly don't change their insider trading at all, and we have a very strong effect for the officers. They also look at different types of insiders. There's a classification that you can give for insiders that they're opportunistic, so they seem to be kind of doing trades based on perhaps insider information, perhaps non-insider information, but they're trying to kind of do trading in their own company stock, versus routine guys that just follow a set pattern every year, and they're clearly not trying to do any sort of timing. And they're both reducing here. The reason a routine guy would reduce selling here is kind of obvious. There's a lot of blackout periods where you're not supposed to be trading. A major inside news information like this would be one of those blackout type periods. So of course, a routine trader would say, nope, we're not trading right now. We're going to wait until after to do it. And the opportunistic traders, they're also reducing selling here too. Again, probably even stronger actually, but they probably know that that this is a really bad time to try and time things because the SEC is right there staring at them. And again, you see a similar thing with the reporting sample. But if the opportunistic traders do actually sell, dotted line is when they would sell, versus the routine traders still selling during this window. Well, if they sell and they're an opportunistic trader over the next couple months, we have pretty significant negative return for that company's stock. Meanwhile, if it was a routine trader and they still did a sale, it's basically a null result in terms of their short-term stock return. And there's a similar pattern with officer versus non-officer. So officer, if they do actually sell, they sell less, but some of them still do it. And if someone does, we have a negative return there. So the authors take this, and I think it's a pretty reasonable interpretation, is that so when they do actually sell, they know something bad is happening. They know the SEC is going to come down on them, and there's going to be negative consequences for the company stock. And for some reason, maybe they think they can get away with it. Maybe they really need to get out, so they do a sale right around that SEC ping. So these people have better information. They know it's going to be bad. And so when they do actually sell, it turns out, yep, it's bad. Meanwhile, the routine traders or non-officer traders, if they sell around this window, they probably didn't know about the SEC interaction, or they were unaware of the potential negative consequences here. They weren't paying attention to that sort of thing. They're just following their scheduled trades and weren't going to do anything different. Nothing bad is being predicted by them deciding to still do that sale. So they run a bunch of other robustness checks that I'll skip. There's a few things that I would be interested in seeing. I discussed this with my friend because we were talking about the paper after he presented. And I think it might be interesting to see some other executive and firm characteristics that tend to encourage or discourage risky behavior, because trading here right around this SEC interaction is very risky. So if we have bad corporate governance, that might be one reason why the CEO is more willing to do it. There's fewer internal controls to prevent this pretty risky thing. Is the executive very confident? We have measures of CEO overconfidence. If the CEO is very confident, maybe he thinks he can get away with it. He might not. He might be able to. Who knows? There's been prior literature about prior unethical behavior. So basically, CEO has done something unethical in the past. He's more likely to do something unethical in the future, and there's actual real effects on the company when the CEO is in charge. So, man, if insider has previously been dinged for something, are they more likely to still trade around this? I would expect perhaps yes. And then another thing is maybe some of those uninformed insiders are actually informed because they have a strong connection with someone who is informed and who passes the information along. Right there, we know there's information channels between all of these board of directors, etc. And if we can identify some of them, maybe those with clear direct channels might act a little bit more like informed traders versus truly uninformed outside directors. Some potential ideas, and they might not work. They might not help support their paper here. They already have an interesting insider trader story as it is. So, to conclude, this is a really clever use of the cell phone data. There are a ton of people working on papers that are using this data. I was like throwing out all sorts of ideas to my friend about like, what about this? What about this idea? What about that idea? I was like, nope, someone's doing that, someone's doing that, someone's doing that. So everyone is in love with this data. And it was obvious from the people watching the presentation, they were really interested in the data, not so much the insider trading story. It's kind of annoying because there's all these great ways to use this data and everyone's already taken them. It's quite surprising that there are still insiders brave enough to sell, although the chilling effect is, of course, not super surprising. Of course, you'd be a little bit nervous about doing this, but I'm surprised they're actually able to do it, and it actually is predictive of that there's going to be worse performance going forward when they actually still take the risk of selling around this event. And this paper is getting lots of attention. A lot of it is based on the data set's novelty, and I always am hopeful that these papers will publish well, these almost always, but I'm especially hopeful in this case because one of the authors is my friend. So I hope this paper does great. Does great, Steve. Best of luck. And that concludes our week 4 here for our seminar Saturdays. Hope you enjoyed this review of this paper. If you did, please comment, like, and subscribe so others can find this video too. And I will see you all next week.